So I want to welcome you to RIT College Art and Design. My name is Shani Avni, and I'm the Ismar David Visiting Curator at the RIT Carey Graphic Arts Collection. This semester, I have the pleasure and the privilege to teach this Women's Pioneer in Design course that was created by RIT Distinguished Professor Emeritus Roger Remington in 2005. This course is based on the Graphic Design Archive that was founded by Remington in 1982 and is housed in the Carey Graphic Arts Collection. Since this course is mostly based on the archives that hold the works of Euro-American women designers that worked in English, it's very important for me to explore with the students women design pioneers that worked outside of the US, other languages and other cultures. And so I'm very excited to host Mariko Takagi and have her here to share her truly fascinating research. I really want to take advantage of this opportunity, turn a question to you, the attendees. If you happen to be researching a woman pioneer designer or know of one, please let me know. I would love to hear more names and more information so we can kind of expand our pool of women pioneers in design. And I'm really thrilled to introduce Mariko Takagi. She's a German-Japanese typographer, an author and designer of books, and an educator. She acts as an intermediary between the Western and Japanese cultures in general, and between Latin letters and Japanese Chinese characters in particular. Takagi received numerous international awards for her design works. From 2010 to 2016, she was an assistant professor at the Academy of Visual Arts, Hong Kong Baptist University. And since 2017, she is in Kyoto, continuing her work as an associate professor and researcher at Doshisha Women's College of Liberal Art in Kyoto. This current research project is based on a collaboration with Miss van der Rohe House in Berlin and focuses on Yamawaki Michiko, the first female Japanese Bauhaus student. So without further ado, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Mariko. I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. So yeah, as Shani already introduced me, I will talk today about Yamawaki Michiko. And as you see on the first slide, sometimes I'm saying the family name first, and then so the last name first, and then the first name at the second position, because this is the typical Japanese way. But on some slides, I turned it the Western way. So maybe it's a little bit confusing, but I hope you can just switch it in your mind. So Yamawaki Michiko was a topic that was very intriguing for me for a long time. And when the Bauhaus 100-year anniversary came closer, there was an opportunity to get deeper into this research and start working on a book. But I will talk to you about this a little bit later. So here are the 11 books that I have written and designed by myself in the last maybe 20 years. And those books are a different kind of category than the books I was doing for clients or I was doing in collaboration, for example, with a museum or other organizations or publishers, because most of the books, they started with an initiative by myself. So mainly being interested in one topic and then starting to do the research. And this was also one kind of my backbone from the time of being a student in Germany, because there I learned to create my content by myself. So most of those books are introducing Japanese culture to a Western readership, simply because I was born in Germany and also then visited the university there. And many times I was confronted with questions about the Japanese culture. And in recent years, I started to focus more on researching on typography and the writing system. So this is a little bit about my background. And today I will talk about this book. This was published in 2019, so in the Bauhaus anniversary year. And it's a little bit different to all the other books I've made, because this is kind of a biography about Michiko, and at the same time, it's talking about Japan in the lifetime of her, because she became 90 years old. And in this period, Japan was changing a lot, and especially like the Japanese culture of design was born, especially at that time when she was young. So today's menu, I will focus first a little bit about the topic, like how Bauhaus was introduced to Japan, because this started quite early. And Japan and of course Germany are looking at the distance quite far away from each other. And so it's quite interesting, like how quick the information was brought from Germany to Japan. You have to imagine, like at that time, like in the 1920s, to go to Germany, like from Japan, it cost you about 2 months. So it is not as quick as now. Now you can just travel by airplane, and then you are within 24 hours at the destination. But at that time, it was around 2 months. And so this is like the first theme. Then I will move on to like the 4 different Bauhaus students from Japan, because they have all different backgrounds. And then I will focus on Yamawaki Michiko. And after that, I will also talk a little bit about like design aspects of the book I have made, because this, I think, is also like one element which was very important to me. And then maybe finally, I will just give you a short insight, like what I'm going to do next, or what I'm aiming to do next. So first, like the Japanese interest in Bauhaus came in a way suddenly. So in 1922, in November 1922, so Bauhaus at that time was around 3 years old. So it was founded in 1919 by Gropius. And only 3 years later, the first Japanese 2 visitors came to the Bauhaus. And this was rather by accident, because Sadanosuke Nakada and Kikuchi Ishimoto, like the first in this row, they came to Germany rather to study about the recent art movements and to know about like the art scene. And especially Nakada, he was going to Germany like to collect art pieces and also to meet up with contemporary artists. So, and they got to know each other on like the ship towards Germany, and started like to visit together galleries and visit together museums and so on. And being in Berlin, it happened that they got to know Kandinsky, and Wassily Kandinsky then invited them to come to the Bauhaus, introduced them Paul Klee and also Gropius. So this was the first time that Bauhaus was mentioned back in Japan. And Kazuo Saito, for example, like he was an artist, and it was his second time visiting Germany. And he had the idea of starting a new art school back in Japan. And so therefore he wanted to get to know like different systems and also like different art schools and programs. And he already had this, had the Bauhaus on the agenda. So you can see how quickly like the information goes from one party to the other. And then like the next 2 came in the following years. And most of them were somehow also connected by friendship, or they know each other because they came from the same field of work. So this is like how the information about Bauhaus spread quite rapidly. And when the first article about Bauhaus came out, like Gropius was not even mentioned by his name, because simply the focus was on Kandinsky and Paul Klee, for example, and later on other architects and other visitors started like to also promote Gropius as one of like the key person in modern architecture, but also in creating a new school and bringing up a new system of education. So, and also like when Bauhaus moved to Dessau, the visitors kept on going to the school, visiting the school, but it took quite a long time until one decided to study there. And it was back in 1926. Takehiko Mizutani, he was at that time already an assistant professor. So he got a funding from his university, but also from the Japanese state, like to study abroad and to bring back the education system. And his mission was to study at the most modern and most innovative school at the time. And this was very interesting because first he enrolled into another school in Berlin, because when he was in Japan, he was already very much excited about going to Berlin, studying there. And I will just later on tell you also which school. So Bauhaus was not on his first list at the beginning. And it seems also like he was not fully convinced that he will study there for the first few months. And you can see then other people are coming in. For example, Masami Makino, like he was already in Germany and working at Taut and Hoffmann. And then, but deciding not to study at the Bauhaus, but rather on continuing his work. Wajiro Kong is also a very interesting person, and I hope to be able to do a research about him at some time. He was an illustrator, and I think also a kind of a first information graphic designer in Japan, because he was capturing a lot of data and situations in Tokyo after the big earthquake, and it has a very strong connection to data visualization. So he's also a very interesting person, and he also visited the Bauhaus when Iwao and Michiko were already in Germany. So September 1930 to August 1932, Iwao Yamawaki and Michiko, the two, enrolled into the Bauhaus as students. And indeed, those two were the first who came with the plan to study at the Bauhaus to Germany. So the people before them were rather visitors or changing the schools after a while. And yes, I will go on a little bit, otherwise I can talk about those visitors for hours. And so finally, at the very end in Bauhaus Berlin, there was Tamae Ono, the second female Japanese, who was already in Europe with her husband for quite a time, and then decided to visit the Bauhaus. But at that time, the Bauhaus moved already to Berlin, and the official courses were not allowed anymore at that time. But it seems that she studied for a few months and worked there for a few months. So here I want to give you one impression, how those reports or those kind of small articles about the Bauhaus looked like in the Japanese newspaper at that time. So this is the newspaper Asahi Shimbun from 1926. And the article, this is the article by Horiguchi, also one of the architects who visited Bauhaus. In this one sheet, it is here. And you can see it is without any visuals. It is only showing a text. And here he's also talking about Kandinsky, for example. And he's talking about the impression that he had when he visited Bauhaus Dessau, mainly about architectural parts. And this was one of the earlier articles about the Bauhaus. So, but all the visitors who came to Germany and then went back to Japan, they took back different materials. And this Bauhaus magazine from 1928 was, for example, one magazine that was brought back. And this was published at the Bauhaus while the second director was in charge. And Hannes Meyer was the director at that time. And you can see like some of the images of this magazine are recycled or used here again. But interestingly, like maybe you can compare it a little bit. On this magazine front cover, you cannot see Gropius, but here, although it was 1929 and the director was already changed to Hannes Meyers, the direction was already changed to Hannes Meyers, Gropius is still here in the front edge. So somehow, like if you think about the reading direction of Japanese text, like which is traditionally from top to bottom and from right to left, like he's still the hidden director of Bauhaus from the Japanese perspective. You can, just decode this from the layout itself. And in this magazine, like this was a special issue from an architecture magazine, and it was a special issue Bauhaus. And there you see all the people who visited the Bauhaus until that time. They published their text about the school. And also like the curriculum, I think like regarding graphic design, this is also quite a well-known design. This was already translated to Japanese, and this was also partly mentioned in the magazine that I've shown you before. So you can see like the interest in the curriculum, but also like in architecture was very strong at that time. So let me just introduce you the 4 students who came from Japan to study at Bauhaus. The first was Takehiko Mizutani, then followed by the couple Iwao and Michiko Yamawaki, and finally Tamae Ono. And this is quite interesting that so many people got interested in Bauhaus and that they enrolled into the system, because in the 1920s, there were already 89 art schools, art and design programs listed in Germany. So they could have been somewhere completely different, but somehow, there was something that was kind of a magnet to the Japanese visitors. Here's a picture of Fritz Kur and there's spelling Takehiko Mizutani. And this picture has even a name, like I think the tallest and the shortest Bauhaus students. And Mizutani was extremely popular at the Bauhaus. Like he first visited the Riemann Schule. This was also kind of a very, very interesting design and art program in Berlin, like a private school. And when Mizutani arrived in Berlin, like this school had a kind of an advertisement out there, and Mizutani found this extremely interesting and appealing, and he enrolled first in this school. And he was also later on like very happy there. So he reports very positively about the school, like saying that like when the school had the 25-year anniversary exhibition, he was mentioned and also exhibited, but he also was published in the catalog. So here you see some of his works. He designed like a kiosk, like a small shop, and also did furniture design and so on. So it seems that he was quite successful at that school and popular as well. But for some reason, like he decided like to change the school. Like first, his report about Bauhaus was not very positive. Like he said, like he visited a show in Berlin, but he found that the design is rather a little bit cool and not so easy to be connected to it. And so first, like from his report, you can rather judge like he wanted to stay at the Riemann Schule, but then decided to go to Bauhaus. Maybe this was also because he got this funding from Japan and was it was somehow his job, like to bring the upfront information and the most modern design education ideas back to Japan. So here is another like page from his report or from one of his articles where he's talking about Bauhaus and introducing Bauhaus to the Japanese readership. And as you can see, in this case, not as much as the one in 1926, here are a lot of images. So it's already easier like to imagine the system. And it's also interesting that here he makes a kind of a personal design to explain the concept or explain the curriculum, how it works. So the second group was Iwao Yamawaki and Michiko Yamawaki, and I will introduce those two a little bit closer to you because especially Michiko is the main person today. But I will do it in like the second section or in the next section. And then Tamae Ono and Michiko Yamawaki on this picture. Tamae is a little bit blurred in the background. So Tamae Ono visited Michiko to get to know from her how she's experiencing Bauhaus and to know like whether it is also for her an opportunity to study there. So now we come to the main theme of today. I named the book Yamawaki Michiko, Japanese Bauhaus Story, because especially like her time at Bauhaus and also her story is telling us a lot about the Japan society at that time, but also like how women were settled in that society and what was expected and maybe their chances. So the background of the story of the two or of the couple is that Iwao Yamawaki, he was born as Iwao Fujita in Tsushima, so Nagasaki. And a lot of people, like especially like I got a request few weeks ago also about Yamawaki Michiko, and I was invited like to be part of a podcast also about women in textile design. And the reason why they chose Yamawaki is because they also thought that she was in a way very independent and maybe also like the person who was taking the initiative because her husband took her name. But I need to say at this position, it's kind of a normal habit in Japan, like especially like for families which have a certain status in society, like who are established in society. If they have only daughters, they will get a husband for the eldest daughter to marry into the family and to continue the family line. So this is a very, very common and traditional pattern. And it doesn't have to do anything with being a modern society or maybe also supporting the daughter, but it is more continuing the family line. So Iwao Yamawaki, he was more than 10 years older than Michiko, and he married into the family. He studied at the Tokyo University of Arts architecture and was already working in Tokyo as a draftsman when he married Michiko. And in a way, like the engagement with Michiko was a kind of a business or a business planner, let's say, because the father from Michiko, he was extremely wealthy, but at the same time, he was also very much interested in education, and he wanted to also offer Iwao something like for this deal. And this offer was to let the two study at the Bauhaus. So first at all, like the plan was not to let both study at the Bauhaus, but at least like let both go to Germany and stay there for a certain time. And the funding came from the family. So Michiko, she was the oldest daughter of Zengoro Yamawaki, and I've just mentioned that he was extremely well educated, but he was also very much interested in art and culture. Indeed, he was a tea master, so a master for a tea ceremony, and therefore, like, he collected art pieces, pottery, and he had also quite a huge knowledge, like, for different styles, but also a sensibility for aesthetic. And I think Michiko, being the daughter of him, got into touch with those kind of aesthetic elements or daily elements through her father. So she got a kind of an education in design without knowing it. And Michiko just graduated from the women's high school when she was introduced to Iwao. So I think she was not even 20, she was 18 years old. So when this kind of deal was settled, so that the two will go to the Bauhaus, Iwao started to visiting people who have been to the Bauhaus, like who went to the Bauhaus and brought something back. So this was his way of preparing himself. He also took German classes, and at the beginning, it was only a promise that Michiko will join him or will go with him, but it was not part of the plan that she will study with him. And also, like, this part of like going together with a husband to another country, staying there with him, was quite common at that time. And not so common was that the wife will study with the husband. And this idea came up when they visited Nakada Sadanosuke, so the first visitor of the Bauhaus, and he just made this recommendation. He recommended to Iwao, so let's do this kind of experiment and let Michiko study at the Bauhaus as well. So this was like the starting of the idea. And as you can see here on the photo, like, the two are both wearing kimono, and Michiko is having this magazine Deform in her hands. I tried to find like this magazine based on this issue. Like, I could find, of course, the series of Deform, but because it's a little bit blurred, it's very hard to see which issue this exactly is. So I tried to find it in archives, but at that point I was not very successful to say, like, what is the content of this issue. So, and yeah, Michiko and Iwao, they left Japan and arrived in Berlin 1930. And briefly after their arrival, Michiko got to be 20. And the first news, like what Iwao received from the Bauhaus, was that Hannes Meyer was dismissed. And he got a kind of panic, like saying, okay, I came to Berlin, I came to Germany to study at the Bauhaus, and now, like, the school is maybe closing. So although it was in the mid of the summer vacation, he went to the Bauhaus and to confront there the people. And it was in the mid of summer vacation and nobody was at the school. So this was like his report. But the next director was already settled in, or he was already assigned, and this was Mies van der Rohe. So their plan, they could still continue with their plan. And at October 1930, Iwao and Michiko started as freshmen at the Bauhaus. And although Iwao already finished his studies as an architect or in architecture, he started with the foundation course again and studying with Albers, Kandinsky, and Schmidt. And interestingly, he writes a lot about those foundation courses, but not so much about Mies van der Rohe. And so Michiko, she didn't have any pre-knowledge about design or architecture or weaving. So for her, the first year was a kind of, or the first semester was a kind of a testing period. So she attended like the different courses, and she made her pieces of design and art. And so the first exhibition at Bauhaus was her kind of a test, or her kind of a semester presentation, where she should prove that she's eligible to the next stage or to the next level. And so they received this letter on the 25th of March, 1931, saying that she can study in the weaving area in the next semester. She only needs to improve her German. Like, this was the letter. And so I think like this is kind of a big compliment, because she was not trained before in this area, and she was really kind of very keen and very disciplined, and worked very hard to get like through the different courses. And in fact, like when you look at the work which she was producing at that time, you can see her sense for aesthetics, and you can see the sense of taste. Like, she had really a good design taste, and she could also work in a very delicate way. So it was not only like her hard working, but I think she had a kind of a good sense, and also the potential to become a designer. But but Iwao was also commenting on this, and he left also kind of those traces, what he thought about this in his letters to his friend. And there he said, thanks to the Japanese virtues, skillfulness and diligence. So it was not like her hardworking or her way of seeing colors, or maybe also having a good taste for form and design. It was rather based on her genes as a Japanese woman. So I was kind of like very disappointed when I read it, but maybe, and this is the normal way, like how he also expressed his emotions, because he had already gone through an education in architecture. So I think for him it was also kind of suddenly like it was a kind of a challenging moment, because they were both doing the same, and maybe he sometimes thought that she's not too bad in this design areas. So, and this is like one sentence like from her biography, which was published in Japanese in 1995. And she started to see at the Bauhaus the parallel worlds, or maybe the similar ideas about aesthetics of the Japanese tea, of the Japanese like way of tea, and also the aesthetics of tea, and the more functional modern design, which was taught at the Bauhaus. And so their kind of connection, because what was valued was the simplicity of design, the functional aspect, but also the quality of materials. And I think, it was quite sudden that the study of Michiko and Iwao ended with the closure of Bauhaus in Dessau. And I think whenever you go to a Bauhaus exhibition and you see like the different photographies, this image is always there. And this was designed by Iwao. So he made this collage about the Nazis like attacking the Bauhaus. And he designed this to be shown in a show in Dessau. But his friend at the Bauhaus, he suggested Iwao to not show it because it's dangerous, or because it's politically dangerous to show this at that time in Germany. So he went back with Michiko And then it was for the first time printed in a magazine back in Japan. And when Michiko and Iwao returned to Japan, they brought back a big collection of different materials and a big collection of works from the Bauhaus colleagues or friends and teaching stuff, but also different works from contemporary designers. And this became a kind of an archive, I would say. After coming back to, or after returning to Tokyo in mid-December 1932, the press was so interested in Michiko Yamawaki, and she got immediately an offer to show her work at an exhibition, so a solo exhibition at the Shiseido Gallery in 1933 already. And first it was only planned for 5 days, but as there were so many visitors, they gave her like 2 more days to show the work. And she didn't only show, of course, her work, which she created at the Bauhaus, but also Iwao's photography was exhibited there, and part of the collection of the different art and design elements that they bought in Germany. And I think a lot of students, or I can see in the records that there are a lot of students, but also a lot of architects, a lot of people being interested in contemporary design and art. They visited the show, and most of them did not only go once there, but they visited several times. And this was also like the initial chance for Michiko to work for Shiseido. So she started working for Shiseido, writing articles, but also being a model. And she also created some very nice collages. And at that, at that show, Iwao also got to know Kotaro Migishi, who was a painter. And so this was also a chance to create, in a way, like a private house in the sense of modern architecture for this painter and his wife. And this was also like the time when they started to teach. Like first, Iwao was teaching photography and stage design, but only 1 semester at the school of Denshiro Kawakita, like who created a kind of a private design school built on the foundation of Bauhaus. And Michiko taught at the school 2 semesters weaving. So in 1937, Michiko announced her retirement from public life. So she then focused mainly on her family life and raising 2 children. So here you see like some images of the Bauhaus exhibition at that time. The photography of Iwao is here, but it is rather not presented as his art piece or his work of art, but rather as a kind of documentation of the Bauhaus, so that people visiting the exhibition can imagine like how the Bauhaus looks like, and maybe who are the people studying there. I think this is Otti Berger. And so to give them a kind of an overall experience. Here are some images of the foundation course. Or no, I think this must be textile design from Michiko. And here are like some fabrics. And Michiko was at the exhibition mainly wearing kimono, like to create a contrast between the somehow foreign and maybe a little bit, strange, how to say, like at that time, Japanese were mainly wearing kimonos, and also like it was not so much westernized. So I can imagine it felt like stepping into a new world, like going into the exhibition. And so being the connecting element, she decided to wear a kimono at the exhibition. Here you see like how the Yamawaki lived like back in 1933. So this is their house in Tokyo. And mainly they were, kind of a couple, very much, or many people were attracted by them because they were living this very modern life and also being very happy to share their information, but also sharing their archive to people who are interested. And here is Michiko, like I think this was for an article in her studio at that time. And also she was a model, like for some magazines. So for a short time period, like she was very much in the focus of journalists, but also, she had the ability, like maybe to influence also a lot of people. And in 1954, when Gropius and Ise Gropius visited Japan, of course, they also visited the house of Yamawakis. So it is said that Iwao always kept the connection with people from the Bauhaus. Gropius was not at the Bauhaus at that time anymore, like when he visited the school, but still like they had a kind of connection. So this was a little bit like what I said before. They shared the first-hand knowledge about the Bauhaus, and also their collection became a kind of foundation for other exhibitions and symposia in and outside Japan. Iwao started to teach at the Nihon University College of Art for Architecture and Design Foundation in 1947. And this was also his main job until his retirement. And Michiko, first, like she somehow resumed like from work for a long time, but then she started to teach again in 1960. And maybe I gave you already some hints. Like she had a lot of opportunities because she was also in the spotlight for quite a time. But somehow, like she was not a person like who developed things like from her position, or she was not eager in keeping the attention on herself, or maybe also she was not really part of the feminist movement in Japan, which was quite strong at the time, 1920s and 1930s. So in her biography, she said, in case I am ever born again into the same time and the same environment, I would want to go to the Bauhaus again, and I would marry Iwao again. This time, though, I would not be so passive and just blindly following Iwao. Next time, I hope that I would live a more active, self-determined life. So I think like this is also quite interesting that she felt it herself, that maybe she could have achieved more, or maybe she could be more like, decisive, and also developing her own career. So now we are almost at the end. This is the biography of Michiko Yamawaki that I mentioned before. And it was for a long time the only one book which was about her, written only in Japanese, by Naomichi Kawahata. And I got in touch with this book when I was writing my PhD. The PhD was on Japanese writing system and typography, but she and also Iwao, they left like some pieces of work, especially from the foundation typography class at the Bauhaus, which also influenced very much other Japanese graphic designers later on. So they had also kind of a very big influence in the graphic design scene in Japan and also in its foundation. So therefore I was mentioning the two. And at that time, it was maybe between 2008, 2012. I read this book and I was very fascinated. And I also thought like, this must be something that is not only accessible within Japan and in Japanese, but it should be known outside of Japan. So my first idea for the Bauhaus year 2019 was to do a translation of this book. And I tried to reach out to Kawahata in different ways, but it was very difficult, or it was not possible. I haven't even had a direct contact. So yeah, basically it ended up that I decided I have to write a book by myself. And then I decided also that it is important, like, to write not only about Yamawaki Michiko and not only making a second biography, but catching like the different developments in Japan and connecting it also to like the German ideas at the Bauhaus at that time. So it's like I'm in a way in the book that I designed and have written, I moved together with Michiko like through the 90 years and also picking up things that happened around her and people who were maybe at that time influential or also kind of key person in that area. So here you see one double page spread from the book. Like one big element of this book is that because I couldn't get access to Kawahata and also to the original archive of the Yamawakis, I had the problem of not being able to use photography from that book. So this was the reason for the cooperation with my sister. So my sister did all the illustration and making them quite realistic. And so there are always at the beginning of some of the chapters opening pages which shows Michiko at that time I am talking about. So mainly it starts then at the time like when Michiko was young and getting prepared for the engagement. Like here are some other opening pages of the books for chapters. And here you see like the layout. I decided I wanted to do it in German and English. So also being able like to tell the story not to a limited readership who have access to German language, but I wanted to keep it more open. And so it's always on the left hand is English and on the right hand is German, for the simple reason because I wrote the script in German and I had a translator who translated this into English just based on the limited time that I had. And looking at the layout, like the right page is always a little bit, starting a little bit lower. And the top margins of the left page is higher so that you can see like just with the margins I am playing around and making a difference. But also I wanted to balance the text, that the English is not starting or ending too early because the German is always, I don't know why, but always longer. And I also included always like when I bring a citation which came from a Japanese origin, I always showed the Japanese. And here I decided to make the typesetting from top to bottom, so vertical line setting, to create a kind of a little bit like weaving a textile image, like text and textile. It's also like word-wise quite close. And I thought like this is a little bit like weaving the three different languages into each other. And I wanted to bring the original citation because I think translation is a very, very personal thing. And I translated this way, but maybe another person would focus on something else. So I always put in like the original text as well. So I said that the German is always longer. So the German text mainly starts also always one page earlier. And I used like different systems because the text has many layers. So those kind of footnotes are quite important, but I do not have only footnotes, but I have also endnotes And I also have sometimes, it's not here on this double page spread, but if a topic is linked to another chapter, or that I'm going more into detail in another chapter on the special topic, I'm also giving on the side margin a kind of a hint for the page number. So like this is then the book, like it is quite heavy, like it's quite thick. And if you look at the cover, it is changing from a light purple to like a more dark blue. And those colors Michiko was also using in her design work, but I think also it's showing like how she changed during the 90 years, but also how Japan and the design scene in Japan changed during that time. So I said, like at the end, I will just give you a kind of hint what I'm aiming to do next. I don't know when I can start this project, but I said that maybe Michiko is not really like a feminist woman, or maybe somebody who wanted a change for women in society, but there was one, and being like active at the same time, and this was Yoko Kurosawa. Gropius visited the school of Yoko Kurosawa and said, "Here I found genuine Bauhaus spirit, the desirable trend I'm looking for, the transnational creative bridge between East and West." Kurosawa is the woman on the left. So this is Kurosawa. And she founded, I think, like the first private Japanese art school, or not art school, design school. And she was like extremely passionate and also extremely active, like in many things regarding like the independence of women and being able to work by ourselves or by oneself and in a professional field. And I would really like to explore this topic because in Japanese, you will find quite a lot of books, but you will not find many information about her in English. So for example, there is an article in Wikipedia in German about her, but not in English. And I think this gap needs to be filled. So yeah, this needs to be continued. And thank you very much for your listening.